Finding it hard to challenge your players? Are they just destroying everything in their paths? Or have you just killed them all with a horrendously unbalanced combat encounter? Hi, I'm Kieran, the Dungeon Master here with the Dirty 20s, and I've been consistently DMing for almost 3 years now. In my time stuck in this chair, I've learned many things. Combat can be insanely fun if it's done right, and combat can be the worst thing in the world, in the multiverse, if it's not. So today, not only am I going to give you as much advice as I can about making monster stat blocks for this game, I'm also going to try and show you how I make combat encounters balanced and tailored for my players and make them feel like, regardless of the enemy, everyone has their place in this game. So first, we're going to talk about making monsters. When you start, you have a lot of boxes to fill out. Name, size, creature type, subtype, alignment, armor class, hit points and dice, speed, ability scores, saving throws, skill proficiencies, damage, resistances, immunities, and vulnerabilities, condition immunities, senses, languages, challenge rating, and then finally all of their unique abilities. Not to mention legendary resistances, actions, mythic abilities, lair actions, or environmental or regional features. Just, all of that. The name is what most people come up with first. Like, for instance, you need to make a magical alien displacer beast that's been infected with a mind flayer tadpole and can just blast psychic waves out from its head, as well as teleport. So obviously, this thing is called the Intellect Predator, and it's going to be pretty strong, and this is the monster we're going to make today. This thing is going to be the end boss of some forgotten cult's dungeon, and it's going to be guarding some really weird loot. Or, alien style, it's going to show itself while your party is in deep space, and begin to pick them off one by one. But we're not designing a dungeon today. That's for a future video that's already in production. So back to our intellect predator and its size. In 5e there are 6 size options. In ascending order they are tiny, small, medium, large, huge, and gargantuan. Finding those more, tiny is anything smaller than 2 feet tall-ish, and they occupy a 5-foot space on the combat board. Small is anything between 2 and 4-ish feet tall, and they also occupy a 5-foot square in combat. Medium is anything between 4.5 feet tall to just over 8 feet tall, and they are the last of the 5-foot space sizes. Large is anything between 9 and 15 feet tall, and they occupy a 10-foot square in combat. Huge is anything between 16 and 30 feet tall, and they occupy a 15-foot square on the battlefield. And gargantuan is anything over 30 feet tall, and they occupy at least a 20-foot square on the battlefield. But that's just the minimum, and they can be as large as the DM or you feels like. I've made 40-foot krakens and dragons, 60-foot behemoths that just take up the entire battlefield. It makes them feel more epic if the monster takes up half the table and they manage to take it down with their little 5-foot guys. So, we're going to make our guy large, and we're going to do that for a couple of reasons. One is to accurately impose the kind of board status that I want them to have. Large creatures fit within a 10-foot cube and are, obviously larger than players. They're threatening, they stand over them without being too massive. They're still agile and fluid without being bulky titans. They can hit 12 squares within 5 feet versus 8 as opposed to if they were medium or small. And reason 2 is because I'm basing their physicality on displacer beasts and that kind of panther aesthetic. And those kinds of creatures are large sized. So a combination of looks, feels, and reference. After their size, let's do their creature type. In D&D 5e, there are 14 creature types. They are aberrations, beasts, celestials, constructs, dragons, elementals, fae, fiends, giants, humanoid monstrosities, oozes, plants, and undead. I'm gonna go with aberration, because that's the alien mind flayer one, and that's all the reasoning you really need. Beasts are regular animals, celestials are angelic beings, constructs are synthetics, dragons are self-explanatory, elementals are beings created by elemental magic like fire mephits or water weirds, fae are tricksy spirit kind of creatures, fiends are devils, demons, and everything in between, giants are just big dudes, humanoids are regular dudes, oozes are self-explanatory, so are plants, and so are undead, and monstrosities are just whatever else, literally whatever else. For the subtype, we are not going to fill that out for this guy, but common ones are demon and devil for fiend, or a race for humanoid like elf or dwarf, but for aberrations, specifically this guy, it doesn't really make sense to have a subtype. You don't really need to worry about it. Types are categorized because different spells affect different things, but subtypes never really matter. It's just like a fill in the blank kind of thing. After that, we're going to do alignment. This is the same as on a character sheet, the 9-space grid that goes from lawful good to chaotic evil. And for this guy, we're going to go with lawful evil. And I say that because he's willfully committing acts of violence and such. He is an intelligent creature. It chooses violence. After that comes armor class, AC, the number they need to roll to hit it. For some creatures, this is an arbitrary number, just high or low. A swarm would just, little guys at low level, I just set it to 10 and everything but nat 1 hits. For bigger threats, this should usually be around the same as your strongest spellcaster's DC or your highest, fighter's AC. So at low levels, around 13 to 16. At the end of the game, maybe as high as 20 to 23. If your enemy wears armor, just give them AC for that armor, but with monsters like these, you can set it with the natural armor feature. It equals 10 plus dex plus whatever number you want. I'm setting this guy's AC at 16, because while this guy is strong, he's only like level 5 strong, not level 15. Next, for hit points. I usually see this as a function. The average damage players do at this level times that number of players times the number of turn you want that combat to last. This function will be shifted towards the longer end if they miss a lot, or towards the shorter end if they do lots of damage that you weren't expecting. For this guy, I'm going to shoot for 4 level 5 players who deal an average of 15 damage per turn with 4-round combat. So that's 4 times 15 times 4 for a total of 240 hit points. If you feel like that's too high, cut it back. This is not a hard and fast rule, it's just sort of the ballpark that I use for how I plan combats, and how I came out with the 1000 hit point feature for the final boss in my previous campaign. When I previously designed the Intellect Predator, though, for use in Icarius, the Black Between the Stars, stream Sundays weekly on our Twitch channel, Dirty 20s D&D, 2 to 6 p.m. It was done for level 3 characters, so it had only like 140 hit points, and the 5 of them finished it off in, 5 or so turns. It was an interesting split encounter over a course of the session that was just kind of this whole thing. For multi-monster combat, divide the pool of hit points amongst however many creatures you've got planned, and then consider that damage versus their hit points versus how many turns you want the combat to last, and how many targets that they can hit in one turn. For low damage dealing guys, boost their HP a little, and maybe considering their ACs reduced a bit to make them easier to hit, but harder to kill. For hit dice, these depend on the creature's size. D4 for tiny, up to a D20 for gargantuan. It's like they planned the 6 sizes to correspond with the 6 dice, nice like that. So at large, these are going to be D10s. And that's all the guy's going to have. After that comes movement speeds, and we're going to be pretty boring here because it gets another avenue of moving that's not talked about in this section. But here you can denote a monster's walking, climbing, burrowing, swimming, flying speeds. Yeah, that's all of them. You can also highlight whether or not this creature can hover, which means if they're paralyzed, they don't fall out of the sky if they're flying. If a monster does not have a climbing or swimming speed, it is half of their walking speed. And for our guy, we're going to go with a 40-foot walking speed, and that's it. It means he's quick, but not crazy fast. He can move, but he also has another avenue of moving that I said we'll talk about later. After that comes ability scores. For low-level threats, don't go crazy. Scores should be capped at roughly 18-ish. So ours is going to get an 18 strength, a 15 dex, 14 con, a 16 intelligence, a 14 wisdom, and a 10 charisma. So good, boss-worthy, but not world-ending. It's very important that you control yourself. It's very easy to be like, I can set whatever numbers I want. 30. Don't do that. After that comes saving throws. You usually choose between 1 and 3 unless they're an endgame boss. Ours is going to have intelligence and wisdom, and that's it. For skill proficiencies, choose between 2 and 7-ish at the high end. Ours is only going to have investigation, perception, and survival, because it's a predator, it's a hunter, and a tracker. It doesn't need persuasion or arcana, and usually a monster does not really need to worry about the intelligence, wisdom, or charisma skills, but sometimes a deception or insight check may come up on their end, so consider just throwing those on if you think they might need it. After those comes the damage stuffs, resistances, immunities, and vulnerabilities. Creatures who are resistant to a damage type take half as much damage, those who are immune take none, and those who are vulnerable take twice as much. For immunities, I'm going to put psychic. For resistances, let's go with non-magical weapons, that is all physical damage. For vulnerabilities, let's go with necrotic, because this is a life-sucking creature, so having the life sucked out of it is a bad thing. And then I'm going to make a plea to you all. Not every monster after level 5 needs to be immune to poison, and please make monsters with vulnerabilities. It's always fun for players to discover them and begin to reshape the battle around them. It's a unique brain challenge to work for them for, in a potentially not very entertaining situation. Some players don't like combat, but they really feel like they can make a difference if all of a sudden they figure out they have the tool to stop the threat quicker. And plea over. Let's move on to condition immunities. For these, there's a long list. Every condition in the game you can make your monster immune to, from blinded to stunned. I usually just pick a few that make sense and are relevant. For instance, if you have no monks, don't worry about stunned. So for this guy, we're going to go with blinded, charmed, and frightened. I chose blinded because I like to imagine this guy as having like an intellect devour, like brain on his face, kind of, sort of. So obviously his eyes are covered and he just sort of feels with telepathy and telekinesis and he sort of knows what's around him. And I chose charmed and frightened because those suck and they end combats instantly. I like players using their words to convince or frighten enemies and not spells or abilities. So I still let people frighten the monsters, but I don't let them frighten them with spells because that's kind of boring. So we can move on to senses. Dark vision, blind sight, tremor sense, and true sight. Dark vision is the ability to perceive in darkness as if it were dim light, and dim light as if it were bright light. Usually when in darkness, creatures can only see shades of gray. We're going to give our guy 120 feet of dark vision, and then blind sight after that is the range you can see without using your eyes, and we're also going to give him 120 feet. I just toss them both in there, so I'm just not confused. So he can see someone if they're still invisible with blind sight. He can see in darkness because he doesn't really see. Tremor sense is the ability to reliably locate creatures through the vibrations in the ground alone. And true sight is the ability to see through illusions, invisibilities, and sometimes even into the ethereal plane. We're not going to give our guy either of those, but those are really useful if you have monsters that should be able to see in those ways. This is also the section where passive perception goes. It should automatically be filled out, but if it's not, it's calculated just like on a player's sheet, 10 plus their perception bonus. After senses comes languages. You can either make them speak them or just understand them. I'm going to have our guy know common and deep speech, but not be able to speak them. And then also in this section, give him 120 feet of telepathy so he can communicate with those languages, but not speak them aloud. Lastly comes challenge rating. This means nothing. It's basically useless aside from determining a monster's proficiency bonus. It's whatever. We're just going to set ours at 5 because that's the level we want to fight, and leave it there. Literally doesn't matter. And now we're done, but we're also not. We want a monster that can do stuff, and right now we have one that does nothing. So we've got to give it abilities and attacks now. Basics first. We're just going to drop multi-attack into its actions. It can make 2 of them, one with its bite and one with its claw. And then we're going to write those attacks. Attack bonus based on strength, 5 feet reach, damages a smaller die or 2, d6 or d8, and then a unique thing. Grapple for the bite and the possibility to be knocked prone if it hits someone with a claw. After those, we're going to give it a spellcasting feature, an innate one, so that they can use some spells at will, some once a day, some 3 times. And now is where we go back to that movement thing from earlier. I'm going to give the Intellect Predator Misty Step at will and Dimension Door 3 times per day. And also, it's teleporting, Vortex Warp 3 times a day, because why not? And then for a once a day, really big damage dealing spell, Mind Spike. And then, another feature, Ambusher. It's one that when you surprise a creature, you have advantage on attacks against them. So the Intellect Predator can vanish from a room, appear in another, and in a flash and flurry be attacking someone with advantage on their whole turn. It makes them an incredibly deadly threat, especially at this low of a level. After this, Legendary Resistances, the ability to automatically succeed on a saving throw. You can set these at any number per day. We're going to set ours at just 1, just so that way you can show them it's a serious threat, but not ignore everything they do. It's like, hold person, no, I'm just going to run away. And then they can't do that again, so you get 1. Legendary Actions. We're also going to give this guy 1 per round, but usually you give them 3. Tiamat has 5 of both of these, it's whatever. This, as a legendary action, could be an attack, casting Misty Step. There can be anything. Large combat encounters with single monster threats should always have legendary actions, so that way that they can take more turns and have better action economy. You know, you give them a lot of legendary actions, so that way, you know, they're not just swarmed and destroyed in a single turn because you're using flanking, which is not a problem. Consider using just a +2. It'll make your life easier. Mythic Actions are the most video game boss type thing in D&D. When you reduce the monster to 0 hit points, they revive back up to a mostly full HP bar, and they gain new abilities, sometimes a new appearance, and it's that metal slug. You think you took him down, but no, he's back up and he looks different. Lair Actions happen at initiative count 20, losing ties, and they're things that the monster can do to change their environment and situation so that they can do stuff on the fly. They can cause crevices to open, gas to flood into the room, or acid to bubble and pop out. Our monster is not going to have any of these. Regional effects we won't also worry about, but for your sake, they are out of combat things. You know, a smelly ground, a black sky, dead trees. It's things to set the ground level for what a monster should do to its environment. A dragon's horde should be constantly spewing, you know, some sort of change to the environment. And that's it. A finished monster and an explanation of just about everything I can think of to make monsters for yourself. Now let's go over how I make encounters and use this guy to make one. Firstly, you need to consider the location. We're going to map this out just like how it happened in the campaign, with a spaceship drifting through space that just had its power cut. You have to think of all the various things you could do to the environment, have them be just as much of an encounter as the monster. I described how it was getting colder, the air was getting thinner, the whole ship was lit with a dim red light, and you could hear creaking and groaning as the ship's pieces expanded and contracted with the pressure and temperatures of deep space. After all of that, consider what effects this should have on the combat. Say, after a certain number of turns, people need to start holding their breath, or they start taking cold damage. They can also make it to the generator and turn the power back on and give themselves an upper hand. After that, consider the party and what obstacles you can place for certain party members, or what avenues you need to keep open for others. I made sure to have wide open spaces so that the druid could wild shape, and I also made sure to have cover points for the wizard so that they could hide. I made sure to have the monster use its teleport function almost every round, sometimes multiple times, and I made sure to keep talking to people, making sure I knew where they were, what they were thinking, and how I could make this combat fun for them. I kept it in motion with good descriptors. This is a game of time. You can breathe, take a second, ask your players for a moment, and then illustrate and take feedback and make your games more fun for yourself and for your players. And that's the secret to this game. Having fun. Thank you for joining me in How to Homebrew Monsters. And be sure to join me next week as we talk about how to homebrew campaign settings. And in case you missed it, last week we went over how to homebrew races as well. And last note, be sure to check us out every Sunday, but the next one is going to be Sunday, July 17th at 2 p.m. for our live streamed game, Icarius the Black Between the Stars. Thank you for joining me, everyone, and have a good day.